Imagine you and your roommate are arguing over who should do the dishes. You make a contract that says, I promise to clean dishes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday if you promise to clean them every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Now, if either of you breaks the contract, there will be a consequence. Let's say you'll have to do the other person's laundry for a month, but there is absolutely no way for you to talk or fight your way out of that consequence. You are basically bound by fate to do your roommate's laundry for a month. Guys, this is pretty much what the binding vows in Jujutsu Kaisen are. They are contracts with consequences, but those consequences are absolute. Though this is where it gets interesting. When you make this kind of contract with someone other than yourself, you don't actually know what those consequences are going to be. Generally, you don't often see binding vows because they are risky and restrictive, but there is one guy who abuses them as if they are cheat codes. We are talking about Sukuna, the king of binding vows. He has basically been spamming them ever since the Shinjuku showdown started. Everyone, we're going to use the first half of the video to properly understand the concept of binding vows, and then the second half of the video will be about all the ways Sukuna has used them to turn the tide of the battle in his favor to an expert degree. If you all are liking the content so far, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends to debate, argue, and discuss. My name is TK. Let's get into some anime. First, let's start with the definition of binding vow. It's very simple. Binding vows are based on mutual interest and they are important in the world of Jujutsu. They are contracts that an individual makes to themselves or someone else. If you follow the rules of the contract, you can increase your strength, enhance your techniques, or even manipulate fate itself. However, if you break the contract, bad things will happen to you. Very, very bad things. Now, this idea that you can make a binding vow with not just yourself but also with others implies that there are two types of binding vows. We have the vows one makes with oneself and vows one makes with others. It was Sukuna who first mentioned this term. It happened when Yuji died and then made a binding vow with Sukuna that he can take control of his body for 1 minute, and in that minute, he won't kill anyone. Yuji forgot about it because that was the condition of the vow, and in hindsight, it was basically just foreshadowing of Sukuna's plan to ultimately take over Megumi. Later in chapter 79, we learn from Kenjaku that binding vows made with another person are a whole different beast than a binding vow imposed on oneself. One of the differences is that the penalty is unknown. This is important to note because when you break a binding vow you made with yourself, the worst that can happen is that you lose what you gained. However, if you break a vow you made with someone else, you can absolutely be sure that a fitting retribution will come your way. There is a reason why Kenjaku warned Mahito not to do anything until they have fulfilled the contract they made with Kochika Muta. This is from when Kochika acted as a double agent for Mahito and Kenjaku in exchange for getting his body healed with Mahito's idol transfiguration. The condition was that Mahito would not lay a finger on anyone from Kyoto Jujutsu High, and even Kokichi was from Kyoto High. If Mahito were to break the vow, he would have been cooked. There was Yuji and Sukuna, and then Kokichi and Mahito. Other than these two, there are 3 more cases of binding vows made with others. As we saw in chapter 102, Ui made a vow with his sister where he agreed to limit his cursed energy until she gives him the permission to go all out. Though this one is silly because as we learn from the official data book, it's just Ui trying to please his wild sister. The next one is serious though. The entire culling games are because of binding vows that Kenjaku had made with other sorcerers. It is basically the concept of a binding vow used to its maximum potential. Finally, there's also that one binding vow Yuta made with the higher-ups in chapter 143. It's when he swore to kill Yuji. He was bound by the vow, that's why he had to actually kill Yuji for a moment before resurrecting him using the reverse curse technique right away. Overall, these are the only known instances in the story of characters making a binding vow with other characters. Moving on, let's talk about binding vows that you can make with yourself. These are much more straightforward because there is no unknown penalty, and at worst you just lose what you gained. Considering the concept, you can also think of these vows as pretty similar to what Gon Freaks did in his fight against Pito. In exchange for never being able to use Nin ever again, Gon summoned all the power he'll ever have. We don't have anything of the same magnitude here, but the vows in Jujutsu Kaisen are definitely much better established. For example, everyone memes about how shonen anime characters go out of their way to reveal their abilities, but when it comes to Jujutsu Kaisen, there is an actual advantage to doing this. It's a binding vow called revealing one's hand, and it basically allows you to increase the effectiveness of your technique simply by revealing how it works. Nanami taught Yuji about this in chapter 20, and it was also Nanami who first showed us what a binding vow made with oneself is like. When he goes into overtime in chapter 23, we also learn that it's not just a cool catchphrase. He has made a vow with himself that allows him to only access 80 to 90% of his cursed energy while he is on the clock. Once the work shift ends, he can bring out the rest of his cursed energy as well. According to the official data book, Nanami can use up to 120% of his maximum power. After Nanami, we have Miwa, and she's the only character other than Sukuna himself who has been shown to have more than one binding vow on screen. The first one is when we learn that noobs like her need to make a binding vow to use simple domain. In Miwa's case, if she takes another step from where she is standing during the simple domain, then it would end. Miwa's second binding vow is a little similar to what Gon did, but not as climactic. In chapter 134, she made a vow to never swing a katana again in order to enhance the strength of her new shadow style technique, Bato sword drawing. In simpler terms, Miwa gave up on the way of the sword just to have one final shot at taking out Kenjaku. Going back over to Mahito, he has made binding vows with just himself. His instant spirit body of distorted killing form had a binding vow involved as it increases his toughness but keeps him from metamorphosizing himself using either transfiguration. Another binding vow he made was to freely change the shape of his elbow blades and head tendrils. But ultimately, the involvement of a binding vow overshadows Mahito's transformation itself. Alright, that's all for other characters. Next, we're going to talk about the binding vow Grandmaster Sukuna himself and all the binding vows he has made during the Shinjuku Showdown. In chapter 255, we learn that Sukuna did in fact use a binding vow while hitting Gojo with the world-cutting dismantle. The thing about this attack is that although it's pretty overpowered and Sukuna did have Gojo right where he needed him to be, it's simply too complicated to use when you actually need it. We're talking about the incantations that take more than a second. For instance, if in chapter 236 Sukuna didn't use the binding vow to be able to use the dismantle at once, Gojo would have seen it coming. He would have easily dodged it. That's why Sukuna made a vow to be able to bypass all conditions for a singular use, but from that point onward, he now has to not only chant the incantations, but also manually direct the slash's trajectory with his third hand. Though it wasn't that much of a big deal considering how Sukuna handled Kashimo. Moving on, in chapter 258, Sukuna makes an impromptu binding vow to once again use his domain expansion. He changes the hand sign for his domain expansion, and then even though his brain was still damaged because of a limited void, he uses the part of his brain which wasn't damaged to apply the curse technique and the barrier to the domain. Ultimately, thanks to this, Sukuna summoned the Malevolent Shrine once again, but only for 99 seconds, as Yuji hypothesized that because all of Sukuna's resources are going into maintaining this high-level domain, so he can only keep this up for 99 seconds. Big deal. Yuji braces himself and hangs in there, but then Sukuna uses another binding vow to bring out the divine flame as well. We learned that in chapter 259, Sukuna made a vow that forbade him from using the divine flame against multiple opponents unless they are inside his domain. However, now that they were in the domain, he could also use the divine flame as he wished. This is the same flame Sukuna used to one-shot Maharaga in Shibuya. Here, he uses it on all living things inside his domain. Just like that, he turns dust particles into thermobaric explosives and makes them detonate with his divine flame. It's basically another kind of a domain expansion in and of itself. Choso knew this, and that's why he rushed to form a blood barrier to protect his brother Yuji. That's why he jumped to sacrifice himself in order to keep him safe. Now, as of chapter 261, these are all the binding vows we've seen from Sukuna. Though there is one other character whose binding vow we haven't discussed yet. It's the man who boasts a total IQ of 530,000 points. We're talking about Yuji's besto friendo, Todo Aoi. When Todo lost his left hand, it did seem as though he'll be retiring. But as expected, this man is too base to retire when his brother's fighting against the strongest cursed in history. He puts a vibra slap in the place of his hand to use as a replacement and also makes a binding vow that allows him to expand his range and to select multiple curse technique targets at the same time. But at what cost? Well, the binding vow just limits the number of swaps per strike of the instrument. Basically, every time Todo hits the vibra slap, he can only swap a certain number of times. Oddly enough, Todo was able to make his boogie woogie better in some ways even after losing a hand. He can now swap with things that are far away, and he can also swap many things at once. Overall, the binding vows you make with others to make sure that both parties keep their word, while the binding vows you make with yourself are about gaining an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. However, if you are someone like Sukuna, you can easily use these like cheat codes. He is so well versed in the art of Jujutsu that it's pretty much as though he can hack the system. Now, what do you guys think? Will we see Yuji do something similar to what Gon did against Pito now, or near the end of Jujutsu Kaisen as we are? Can Sukuna defeat Goku with enough binding vows? Come on guys, let's continue this discussion in the comment section down below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It keeps the channel growing stronger every day. It's always appreciated. Well then, with that being said, I'll see you in my next video. My name is TK, loving us some anime.